Hello, 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 and namaste, my witchlings. How are we doing tonight? Welcome back to the Yoga Witch's Cauldron. Go ahead and pull up a chair. The creaky one there is fine. Hey, Bean. All right. He hid my script. Oof. Hey, Bean. Sleepovers are fun. All right. Okay. Be right back. All right, hello, my witchlings, namaste, and welcome back to the Yoga Witch's Cauldron. Go ahead and pull up a chair. That creaky one is fine over there. Wrap your hands around something warm and just let your shoulders drop just a smidge as you settle in with me. This is not a lecture today. This is not a rallying cry. This is definitely not a list of things you should already be doing better. This one is just a Hearth Fire conversation. The kind that happens late at night when the noise of the day has finally gone quiet and you are left alone with your thoughts. The kind of conversation that happens when the world feels heavy. Not in an abstract way, but in a way, in a lived-in, bone-deep way. And you're really tired of pretending you're not tired. You're tired of being fine, of being strong. You are so tired of being the one who always holds it together. Tonight, we are talking about something that comes up again and again and again in this community, especially amongst those of us who care deeply, who show up, and who try to live with integrity in a world that feels like it's constantly asking for more than we can possibly give. We're not talking about peace. Oh no, correction. We are talking about peace. I'm sorry. Still sleep deprived. We are talking about peace, but not the Instagram version. Not the version with the perfectly curated altar and the softly filtered sunlight and the caption that says, "Just breathe," as if breath alone can fix systemic harm, grief, or exhaustion. Not the just think positive version that skips over reality and calls it spirituality. And definitely not the version of peace that quietly asks you to erase yourself in the name of being loving, kind, evolved, or enlightened. We are talking about peace that lasts. The kind of peace that doesn't hollow you out and doesn't demand constant self-sacrifice. The kind of peace that doesn't leave you burned to ash and wondering where the fuck you went. Because here, my friends, is the truth, and I want to say this very clearly right up front. You are not required to burn yourself alive to prove that you care. You are not required to exhaust yourself to be compassionate. You are not required to stay endlessly available to be loving. And you are not required to suffer quietly to be good. And if any spiritual teaching, activist space, or community, including the ones that you love, is telling you otherwise, then yes, we need to talk about that. Because that message doesn't come from wisdom. It comes from systems that benefit when caring people don't rest. So many of us were taught long before we ever found yoga or witchcraft or meditation that love meant availability. That being good meant being accommodating. That safety came from being useful, agreeable, and easy to be around. And then we layered spiritual language on top of that conditioning. Hold space, be the bigger person, choose peace, send love and light. All beautiful phrases until they're used to pressure people into silence, self-abandonment, and endurance that slowly breaks them. Peace was never meant to be a performance. It was never meant to be something you act out while your nervous system is screeching. Peace was meant to be inhabited. So, tonight, we're slowing down enough to ask some uncomfortable but very necessary questions. What happens when peace becomes another expectation instead of a lived state? What happens when compassion is measured by how much you're willing to give up? What happens when doing the right thing leaves you chronically depleted? And maybe most importantly, how do we bless the world without losing ourselves? This is not about disengaging, apathy, or turning away from harm. It is about learning how to stay present, tender, and ethical without setting ourselves on fire. So before we go any further, I want to invite you into the pace of this conversation. Nothing here is urgent. Nothing here needs to be solved in one setting, and nothing here requires you to agree with everything I say. This here is a space for curiosity, not compliance. So let's start the way we always do here in the Cauldron, with honesty, warmth, and a refusal to rush. Take a breath with me. Inhale. And sigh it out. Exhale. Good. Let that be your permission to slow down for the next little while. You are allowed to be here exactly as you are. If you've been feeling exhausted by doing the right thing, you are so not alone. If you've been feeling like peace has quietly turned into yet another performance, another thing you're supposed to do correctly, another way you might possibly be getting it wrong, you are so not broken. And if you've ever wondered why caring so deeply, showing up consistently, and trying so hard to live with integrity has left you feeling brittle instead of connected, honey, this conversation is for you. Because something has gone sideways, not with you, but with the way peace has been framed. Many of us were taught directly or indirectly that, well, being good meant being available. That being loving meant being endlessly accommodating. And that being spiritual meant rising above our own limits. Maturity looked like swallowing discomfort quietly and calling it grace. Especially women and AFAB people, caregivers, people whose identities, histories, and or survival strategies taught them that safety came from being useful, agreeable, or easy to be around. For many of us, love became synonymous with self-erasure long before we had language for it. And then, as if that conditioning weren't heavy enough, we layered spiritual language on top of it. Choose peace. Send love and light. Hold space. Be the bigger person. All of which sound beautiful until they're used to justify silence, and they're used to dismiss the anger that actually contains information, until they're used to pressure people into staying in situations that are slowly breaking them. At that point, peace stops being a practice and becomes a performance. A performance of calm, kindness, and being unbothered, enlightened, and above it all. And performances are fucking exhausting. Here's the thing nobody actually tells you early enough, especially if you are someone who cares deeply about others, justice, healing, and the world. Without boundaries, my friend, peace is not peace. It's collapse. Now, collapse might look quiet, polite, and even potentially look spiritual from the outside, but inside it feels an awful lot like numbness. Like resentment you don't know what to do with, and fatigue that doesn't go away with sleep. It feels like the slow loss of joy, curiosity, and tenderness. Collapse, my friends, is not sustainable, and when collapse becomes normalized, we start mistaking burnout for maturity and self-abandonment for compassion. This matters, not just personally, but collectively, because exhausted people are easier to manipulate, burned out people are easier to silence. People who have been taught that rest is selfish will keep giving until there is absolutely nothing left, and then blame themselves for that emptiness. This is not a personal failure. It is a systemic problem, and it shows up everywhere. In families, spiritual communities, activist spaces, and in care professions. In friendships where one person always holds more than their fair share. Hi, been there too. So when we ask why peace feels so fragile right now, why it shatters under pressure, and why it feels unavailable when we need it the most, part of the answer to that is this. We've been asking peace to exist without structure. We have been demanding compassion function without limits. We have been asking people to remain open with zero protection. We've been asking nervous systems to endure constant activation without rest. That is not peace. That is endurance dressed up as virtue. And endurance always has its breaking point. This conversation matters because peace that cannot survive contact with reality is not useful. Peace that requires you to silence yourself is not ethical. Peace that costs you your health, your boundaries, or your sense of self is not a gift to the world. It's a quiet tragedy that we have learned, unfortunately, to normalize. So tonight, we are not here to shame ourselves for caring. We are here to redefine what sustainable care actually looks like. We are here to ask what kind of peace can be lived, not just spoken about. What kind of compassion can be practiced without self-erasure, and what kind of presence allows us to remain human in systems that reward numbness. Now, this is not about disengaging, it's not about apathy, and it is definitely not about not caring. It's about caring in a way that allows you to stay alive inside your own damn life. Because peace that lasts is not built on collapse. It is built on honesty, boundaries, and nervous systems that are allowed to regulate. And on the radical idea that you matter as much as the world you are trying to care for. What a concept, right? That right there is why this conversation matters. Not because peace is fragile, but because we've been asking it to survive impossible conditions. And those conditions can change. I want to talk about fire for a minute, because fire imagery comes up constantly in spiritual spaces, especially when we talk about passion, purpose, devotion, service, and care for the world. We talk about being lit up. We talk about being on fire for what we believe in, having a fire in the belly, or keeping the flame alive. And on the surface, that all sounds hella powerful. Fire gives warmth. It gives light. It transforms things, right? But here's what we don't talk about often enough. There are different kinds of fire, and not all of them are meant to burn the same way. The fire we glorify most often is the bonfire. Bonfires are dramatic. They're bright, impressive from a distance. They draw a crowd, create spectacles, and make for great photos and big moments. A bonfire burns fast. It consumes everything nearby, and it throws heat outward in all directions, and then eventually, inevitably, it burns out. That's not moral judgment right there. That is simply physics at work. Bonfires are not built to last through the night. They are built to blaze, impress, and to peak. Once the fuel is gone, there is nothing left but ash and exhaustion. And yet, this is the model that so many of us were taught to live by. We were taught to live like bonfires, always visible, always available, and always producing heat. We were taught that if we weren't burning brightly, then we must not care enough. That rest meant we were losing momentum, and slowing down meant we were becoming complacent or apathetic, especially if we were people who cared about others, especially if we were people who showed up, if we were people whose worth was quietly tied to usefulness. So, we kept feeding the fire. We gave more time, more energy, more emotional labor, and more patience. We stayed late. We said yes when we really wanted to say no. We held space when our own capacity was already stretched far too thin. And then, when exhaustion hit, because, of course it did, we blamed ourselves. We told ourselves we just needed better boundaries next time. More discipline, more resilience, more spiritual maturity. But we didn't question the structure that demanded constant burning in the first place. We didn't question why care was only celebrated when it was visible. Why rest was only acceptable after collapse. And why devotion was measured by depletion. This is where the hearth fire matters. A hearth fire is different. It's contained, protected, and tended. It doesn't try to light up the entire sky. It doesn't demand everything from you all at once. It doesn't burn hottest when it's most exposed. A hearth fire burns steadily, warms consistently, and creates a place to gather. It lasts through the night. A hearth fire is built with intention. It is surrounded by stone or brick. It is given boundaries so it doesn't destroy the home it's meant to warm. And that right there, that is the part that matters most. The Hearth Fire is powerful because it is protected, not in spite of it. Peace that lasts is Hearth Fire peace. It is warm without being consuming, steady without being loud. It is transformative without being destructive. And yet, many of us have internalized the belief that if our care is not spectacular, it doesn't count. That if we are not visibly burning, we must not be committed. And that if we protect our energy, we are withholding love. We have been taught that if we tend our own limits, we are somehow betraying the cause. And this belief shows up everywhere. It shows up when we feel guilty for resting. It shows up when we apologize for needing space. It shows up when we override our bodies because other people have it worse. Oh, I'm guilty of that one. But Hearthfire Living asks a different question. Instead of asking, how much can I give? It asks, what allows me to keep giving without destroying myself? That's not a lesser devotion. It's a wiser one. A hearth fire requires tending. It requires attention, discernment, and honestly knowing when to add fuel and when to let the fire settle down. It does not respond well to neglect. And it doesn't respond well to overfeeding either. Too little care and it goes out. Too much and it becomes dangerous. Sustainable compassion works the same exact way. You cannot stay open indefinitely without rest. You cannot stay tender indefinitely without protection. You cannot keep offering warmth if you refuse to tend the source. And this is where so many of us were failed. Not because we cared too much, but because we were never taught how to care with structure. We were taught intensity instead of sustainability, visibility instead of longevity, and performance instead of presence. And then, we were shocked when burnout arrived. That burnout is not a sign that you were weak, my friend. It is a sign that you have been living like a bonfire in a world that never stops asking for heat. Hearthfire peace invites us to do something radical instead. It invites us to tend ourselves as part of the work and to protect our energy as an ethical choice. It invites us to stop equating exhaustion with virtue. Now, this doesn't mean disengaging from the world, because a hearth fire still warms the room, it still provides light, and it still invites people to gather. It just does so without destroying itself. Peace that lasts doesn't require a spectacle or martyrdom or for you to disappear. It genuinely requires presence, honesty, and boundaries that keep the flame alive. So, if you are tired tonight, really tired, let this land gently. Honey, you were never meant to live as a bonfire. You were meant to tend a hearth. And that hearth, steady, protected, and enduring, is more than enough to warm the world. Let's talk about the mantra that has been woven through this entire week and honestly through so much of modern yoga and spiritual culture. Lokah Samastah Sukhino Bhavantu. May all beings be everywhere, be happy and free. It's a beautiful mantra. Spacious, hopeful, deeply aspirational. And it is very often lived poorly. Not because people misunderstand the Sanskrit, not because the translation is wrong, but because of what we quietly layer on top of it. Somewhere along the way, this blessing became distorted into something like, may all beings everywhere be happy and free, even if it costs me everything, even if it exhausts me, even if I disappear in the process. That is not what this mantra asks of us. Lokah Samastah is not a command to sacrifice yourself on the altar of global suffering. On the altar of global suffering. It is not an instruction to carry pain that is not yours to carry. It is not a spiritual justification for burnout. And yet, many of us have treated it that way. We've internalized the idea that to wish happiness and freedom for all means we must become endlessly available, that our own limits are somehow selfish, that our fatigue is a moral failure rather than a signal. But Lokah Samastah is relational. It recognizes something very important. You are a being among beings, not outside the circle, not above it, and so not required to bleed so others may be healed. You are included, and that inclusion matters. Because if you're exhausted, resentful, or numb, that state ripples outward just as surely as calm, kindness, and compassion do. And that's something we don't talk about enough. We talk about intention, we talk about positivity, we talk about sending good energy out into the world, but we don't talk enough about the quality of the state we're sending it from. Peace is not something you send out while abandoning yourself. Peace is something you inhabit, and others feel it through contact. They feel it in how you listen, in how you respond instead of react. They feel it in how your presence either settles a room or tightens it. You don't have to chant louder, you don't have to perform devotion, or give more than you can sustainably give. You have to stay present and intact. That's the part that gets lost and forgotten. So many of us were taught that spiritual maturity looks like rising above our own needs, that wisdom means being unbothered. Compassion means absorbing discomfort without protest. But Lokah Samastah does not ask you to transcend your humanity, it asks you to participate in it. Participation requires presence. Presence requires capacity. Capacity requires care. And this right here is where martyrdom sneaks in. Martyrdom dresses itself up as virtue and whispers that exhaustion proves commitment. Depletion is the price of love. But martyrdom does not liberate anyone. It creates resentment, bitterness, and people who burn out quietly and then disappear, taking their gifts, wisdom, and tenderness with them. That's not happiness. Nor is it freedom. And if we are being completely honest, it doesn't even fucking work. A person who is constantly overriding their own limits cannot stay open. They eventually harden, withdraw, or lash out. Not because they're bad people, but because nervous systems have breaking points. Lokah Samastah is not asking for that outcome. It's asking us to recognize that peace spreads through regulation, not force. Through steadiness, not spectacle. Presence, not performance. When you tend to your own capacity, you are not opting out of care. You are choosing the conditions under which care can continue. When you rest, you are not betraying the world. You are protecting your ability to remain in relationship with it. And relationship is where peace actually lives. This mantra is not about fixing everything. It is honestly about aligning yourself with a way of being that reduces harm, including harm to yourself. Ahimsa. Ahimsa includes you. It is about recognizing that freedom is not only something we wish for others, but something we practice internally by refusing to participate in systems, internal or external, that demand our erasure. Lokah Samastah does not require urgency, nor does it require perfection. It does not require you to carry the weight of the world on your shoulders. It requires sincerity. And sincerity looks like asking honest questions, such as, what can I offer without abandoning myself? What allows me to stay tender instead of bitter? What helps my nervous system remain open rather than defensive? These are not selfish questions. They are ethical ones. Because peace that costs you your wholeness will not last. Peace that includes you actually has a chance. So, if this mantra has ever felt heavy to you and if it has ever sounded like yet another impossible standard, let it soften tonight. Let it return to what it actually is. A blessing, not a burden. A reminder that happiness and freedom are relational, that they move through systems, bodies, and communities, and that your state of being is a part of that web. You are not required to disappear for the world to heal. You are required to remain here, present, resourced, and, human. That is how Lokah Samastah becomes lived wisdom instead of spiritual martyrdom. Step into dietheyogawitch.shop where magic meets movement and everyday rituals get an upgrade. Browse my handmade and intention-infused jewelry and then snuggle up with Die the Yoga Witch mugs, yoga mats, t-shirts, sweatshirts, and so much more. Treat yourself, bless a friend, and bring a little witchy sparkle into your daily life. That is dietheyogawitch.shop. And if you're enjoying this podcast and would like to step a little deeper into the coven, consider clicking on that join button and becoming a member of the channel. There are some amazing perks for all my witchlings, with levels starting at just $1 a month. Also, a reminder that you can help this channel for free by liking, subscribing, and sharing this video with a friend. I genuinely appreciate all your support, and thank you so much for tuning in. All right, back to the show. This, my friends, is where yoga philosophy meets lived reality. Oh, excuse me. Not the polished version, not the aspirational version, the embodied, biological, sometimes inconvenient truth. A dysregulated nervous system cannot sustain compassion. It doesn't matter how strong your values are. It doesn't matter how much you care. It doesn't matter how committed you are to justice, healing, or peace. When the nervous system is overwhelmed, compassion becomes fragile. It becomes reactive, brittle, and it moves toward extremes, shutdown, or explosion. That's not a character flaw, my friends. It's biology. The nervous system's primary job is survival, not morality. When it perceives threat, whether physical, emotional, or existential, it shifts into protective mode. That mode narrows perception, speeds up reactions, and reduces the brain's capacity for nuance, empathy, and relational thinking. In other words, When your system is constantly activated, it becomes much harder to stay open. And so many of us are currently living in near constant activation, scrolling through crises, reacting to headlines, witnessing harm without time or space to recover, being asked to care deeply without ever being allowed to rest. Now, over time, that level of activation erodes our capacity. Your ability to listen shrinks. Your tolerance for complexity narrows. Your patience shortens. Not because you don't care, but because your nervous system is exhausted. This is why rest, breath, and regulation are not indulgent. They are infrastructure and the unseen systems that make sustained compassion possible. We often talk about compassion as a moral stance, but compassion is also a state-dependent capacity. You cannot access it reliably when your body is in fight or flight. You cannot sustain it when your system never gets to come down. A regulated nervous system can do things that an overwhelmed one simply cannot. A regulated nervous system can stay present in discomfort without panicking. It can hear opposing views without immediately collapsing or attacking. It can definitely hold boundaries without becoming rigid or cruel. And in all honesty, it can offer care without slipping into martyrdom. That's not accidental. That's practiced. And this is what yoga was always pointing toward. Not transcendence of the body, but relationship with it. Breath practices, grounding postures, conscious rest. These are not aesthetic add-ons. They are tools for keeping the nervous system within a window where compassion remains accessible. When we skip this piece, we end up trying to practice peace with bodies that are screaming for relief. And eventually, something gives. This is where burnout enters the conversation, and burnout is so often misunderstood. Burnout is not a lack of dedication, it is not weakness or a failure to care enough. Burnout is a predictable outcome of sustained stress without sufficient recovery or support. That's why the work of the Civic Care Collective exists. Civic Care Collective is a political burnout support group that I am co-founder of. Because political burnout, activist burnout, caregiver burnout, these are not personal shortcomings, they are systemic outcomes. They happen when people are asked to remain engaged, informed, outraged, and compassionate without the communal infrastructure needed to support that level of activation. We talk a lot about showing up. We talk less about what allows people to keep showing up. Care is not a detour from justice. Care is what makes justice possible over time. Without regulation, movements fracture. Without rest, communities cannibalize their most caring members. And without boundaries, compassion turns into resentment. This is not theoretical, my dears. We have watched it happen again and again and again and again and again. Sustainable compassion requires cycles: engagement and rest, action and integration, speaking and listening. It requires acknowledging that bodies are not machines and nervous systems are not endlessly elastic. And here's the part that can be really hard to hear. If your nervous system is constantly activated, you may unintentionally cause harm, even while trying to do good. Not because you're malicious, but because dysregulation leaks. It leaks into your tone, urgency, and into the inability to pause before responding. Regulated presence, on the other hand, is contagious in a completely different way. A regulated person can slow a room down. They can hold space without absorbing everything. They can interrupt cycles of escalation simply by staying grounded. That is not passive, my dears. That is powerful. But it requires tending. It requires practice to help the body discharge stress instead of storing it. It requires rest that is not earned through collapse. It requires boundaries that protect capacity instead of apologizing for it. And here's the big one. It requires community. Nervous systems regulate best together, in safe company, in spaces where care is mutual rather than extracted. This is why doing this work alone is so difficult, and why so many people quietly disappear when the load becomes too heavy. Peace that lasts is not held by individuals pushing themselves past their limits. It is held by systems that understand biology. It is held by communities that value rest as much as action, and by movements that protect their people instead of consuming them. By spiritual practices that include the body instead of bypassing it. We don't have a spirit if our body isn't taken care of. Sustainable compassion does not ask you to override your nervous system. It asks you to listen to it. To treat signals of overwhelm not as obstacles to peace, but as information. Information that helps you adjust. Information that helps you choose differently. And information that keeps you human. When we honor the nervous system, compassion becomes steadier. Less dramatic perhaps, but far more reliable. And in a world that desperately needs care that doesn't burn itself out, that steadiness is not a luxury. It is essential. All right, my witchlings, let's name something directly without softening it or dressing it up and putting a bow on it. Boundaries? Boundaries are not a failure of love. They are not selfish, cold, or a sign that you care less. Boundaries are the structure that allows love to survive. Without them, love doesn't become infinite, it becomes distorted. If your peace requires endless availability, it will eventually curdle into resentment. If your compassion requires self-silencing, well, it's gonna turn into bitterness. If your spirituality requires you to override your body's limits, it's going to break you. Not maybe, not eventually, it will. Because love, and I do mean real, lived love, cannot exist without truth. And boundaries are one of the clearest ways truth shows up in the body. Boundary is not a wall, it is not a rejection, and it is not an attempt to control someone else. A boundary is simply an honest answer to this question. What allows me to keep showing up without losing myself? That's it. It's not a moral judgment, a demand. It is information. And that answer will change over time. It will change with seasons, capacity, health, grief, and growth. Now that's not failure, that is being alive. One of the most damaging myths we inherit is the idea that consistency equals virtue. That if we loved someone once, we should be able to love them the same way forever. That if we said yes before, we owe a yes now. That changing our limits means we were dishonest to begin with. But boundaries are not contracts. They are conversations. They respond to reality as it actually is, not as we wish it were. Now, peace does not demand perfection, it demands truth. And truth sometimes sounds like, I do not have capacity for this right now. I need to step back. I cannot offer that without harming myself. Those are some good boundaries, right? Those sentences there, my friends, are not betrayals. They are acts of care for yourself and for the relationship. Because care that ignores reality isn't care. It's fantasy. And fantasy collapses under pressure. This is especially hard for people who were taught that love meant endurance. So frickin' many of us learned early on that being lovable meant being easy, being low maintenance and accommodating. We're not asking for too much. We are not taking up too much space. For some of us, boundaries weren't modeled at all. Hi. For others, boundaries were punished. For many, boundaries felt dangerous. So when we begin to set them, it can feel like we're doing something wrong, even when we're doing something totally necessary. The discomfort there doesn't mean the boundary is incorrect, though. It means the nervous system is learning something new. And this is where compassion for yourself matters. Setting boundaries is not a one-time event. It is a practice. And like any practice, it's kind of awkward at first. You're going to over-explain. You're going to apologize when you don't need to. And you're definitely going to second-guess yourself. You're going to feel guilty even when you are acting with integrity. That doesn't mean you need to stop. It means you're unlearning a pattern that told you your needs were inconvenient. Now here's another harsh truth that we often don't say out loud. People who benefit from your lack of boundaries will react poorly when you set them. They're going to call you selfish. They're going to accuse you of changing. They may even say that you're being unloving or unspiritual. Their reaction is not proof that your boundary is wrong. It is information about the system you're operating in. Love that only exists when you are available on demand is not love, it's extraction. And peace that requires you to disappear is not peace, it's compliance. Boundaries are how we stop confusing the two. Wow, who'd have thought? When you set a boundary, you are not saying, I don't care. You are saying, I care enough to be honest about what is possible. And honesty is the foundation of any relationship that intends to last. This is where peace becomes practical, my loves. Peace looks like saying no before resentment builds, resting before you collapse, stepping back before bitterness takes root. Peace looks like protecting your capacity so that when you do say yes, it's real. Because forced yeses poison relationships. They create invisible debts, unspoken anger, and distance disguised as devotion. A true yes requires choice, and choice requires boundaries. This applies not just to individual relationships, but to communities, movements, and spiritual spaces. When boundaries are discouraged, the most caring people burn out first. The rest is stigmatized. Resentment replaces solidarity. When limits are framed as weakness, collapse becomes inevitable. Sustainable peace depends on collective respect for capacity. That means creating cultures where people are allowed to step back without being shamed, where care is shared instead of extracted, and rest is understood as part of the work, not a reward for surviving it. And it means, perhaps most challenging of all, learning to honor your own limits, even when no one else is enforcing them, when the world keeps asking, the need is real, and even when the suffering is visible, especially then. Because boundaries are not about denying reality. They are about engaging reality without destroying yourself. And that matters, not just for you, but for the people who need you to stay whole. Love that lasts is not limitless. It is well held and shaped by honesty, protected by clarity, and sustained by rest. So, if you are learning to set boundaries right now, clumsily, imperfectly, and with a lot of internal noise, let this be reassuring. You are not failing love. You are giving it a chance to survive. Peace does not ask you to disappear. It asks you to remain. And boundaries are one of the ways you can stay here, intact, present, and capable of real care. Here's something I want you to sit with for just a moment. Not rush past, not immediately agree or disagree with, just let it land. Peace does not spread because we announce it. It spreads because we practice it in relationship, not in slogans, captions, or carefully curated moments of calm. Peace moves through contact. It moves through how we listen when someone is saying something we really don't want to hear, through how we disagree without trying to dominate or disappear, through how we repair after conflict instead of pretending nothing ever happened. Peace is not a vibe, it is a behavior. And this is where performative peace and relational peace part ways. Performative peace focuses on tone. It focuses on sounding calm, appearing reasonable, and on being seen as the mature or evolved one in the room. Relational peace focuses on impact. It asks different questions. Not, did I sound nice? But, did I tell the truth without unnecessary harm? Not, did I stay calm? But, did I stay present? Not, did I keep the peace? But, did I protect dignity, mine and theirs? Relational peace understands that sometimes calm tone can exist with deep harm, that silence can reinforce injustice, and that politeness can definitely be used to avoid accountability. It also understands that sometimes peace looks messy. It looks like clear no's that disappoint people. It looks like uncomfortable conversations that don't wrap up neatly. And it looks like stepping back when capacity is gone and returning later, resourced, grounded, and able to engage again. This kind of peace is quieter, less visible, and far less impressive from a distance, but it is durable. Because relational peace doesn't rely on performance, it relies on presence. Presence means staying in your body, noticing when you're getting activated and slowing down instead of escalating, being willing to pause, breathe, and choose response over reaction. And presence is something you can only practice with other people. This is why peace cannot be perfected alone. You do not learn peace in isolation. You learn it in conversations, disagreements, and moments where repair is required. That's also why peace is not passive. Choosing relational peace often means refusing the easy path. It means not joining the pile-on, not amplifying outrage when it's feeding the algorithm more than it's feeding change. It means not performing certainty when curiosity actually would move things forward. Refusal can be peaceful. Silence can be ethical when it is chosen consciously rather than imposed through fear. Relational peace is not about being agreeable, it's about being aligned. Aligned with your values, your capacity, and with the reality of your situation in front of you. This alignment is what allows peace to move through systems without being enforced. Because enforced peace is fragile. It cracks under pressure and collapses when discomfort enters the room. It shatters the moment someone refuses to comply. Relational peace, on the other hand, bends, adapts, repairs, and makes room for complexity without losing its center. This is why regulated presence matters so much here. A regulated person changes the emotional temperature of a room without saying a word. They listen without immediately defending, and they speak without rushing. They hold boundaries without cruelty. That presence doesn't come from trying to look peaceful. It comes from practice, with breath, rest, and noticing when your nervous system is escalating and choosing to slow down instead of speed up. And then, crucially, practice with other people, because peace that never meets relationship remains theoretical. It sounds good, photographs well, but it doesn't hold up under strain. Relational peace is tested peace. It is peace that has survived disagreement, misunderstanding, and repair. Peace that has learned the difference between discomfort and danger. It can tolerate tension without dissolving. You don't have to look peaceful to practice this, and you don't have to speak softly all the time. You don't have to be endlessly patient or suppress anger that contains truth. You have to be present. Present enough to notice what's happening in you. Present enough to stay connected even when it's uncomfortable, and enough to step back when you're no longer resourced, and honest enough to return when you are. This is what makes peace relational instead of performative. It doesn't ask you to be perfect. It genuinely just asks you to be real. It doesn't demand constant harmony. It allows for rupture and then prioritizes repair. And repair is where peace actually deepens. Every time you choose to come back into conversation instead of disappearing, and every time you tell the truth without attacking or listen without planning your rebuttal. These moments don't go viral, but they change things, quietly, slowly, and relationally. And that is how peace spreads, not as a declaration, not as an identity, not as a performance, but as a lived practice that moves through bodies, conversations, and communities over time. You don't have to look peaceful. You have to be willing to stay present. That willingness, imperfect, embodied, and human, is far more powerful than any performance could ever be. As the year comes to a close, or came to a close yesterday, there is often a quiet and sometimes not so quiet pressure to do something meaningful with the ending, to reflect harder, extract lessons, resolve those loose threads, and to become a better, wiser, more healed version of yourself literally overnight. Endings tend to bring out the part of our... Still sleep deprived, y'all. I apologize. Endings tend to bring out the part of us that believes we should be able to tie everything up neatly, as if life were a book we could simply close, satisfied, before starting a new chapter. Wouldn't that be nice? But real lives do not work that way, y'all. Real lives are unfinished, and they carry grief forward and carry questions forward. They carry tenderness that doesn't resolve on a schedule. So, I want to offer a different invitation as this year winds down. What if the most meaningful offering you make right now is not disappearing? Not disappearing into exhaustion, over responsibility, and into silence that feels like safety but costs you your voice. So many of us cope with endings by shrinking. We tell ourselves, I'll rest later. I'll feel later. I'll feel the emotions when everything's settled. We tell ourselves we'll take up space again once everything is handled. Come on, y'all. We all know later has a way of never arriving. Later never comes. Peace that lasts does not ask you to vanish in order to survive the transition. Peace that lasts allows you to remain a whole person inside the work of caring. That means letting the year be incomplete, letting yourself be unfinished, and letting some questions remain open. You don't have to process everything. You don't have to make meaning out of every wound. You really don't have to justify your fatigue with productivity or insight. You are allowed to simply arrive at the end of this year as you are. Tired, maybe. Tender, maybe. Still caring, but differently. You do not have to be consumed to be committed. Commitment does not require collapse. Devotion does not require depletion. And care, my friends, does not require you to disappear. As you stand at this threshold between what has been and what is not yet, it might help to ask a gentler set of questions. Instead of, what did I accomplish? What did I fail at? And what should I have done differently? Try asking, what helped me stay human, connected, and what do I want to carry forward because it nourished me? Those questions honor continuity instead of performance, because this is not a reset button, it's a turning, and turnings ask for steadiness, not spectacle. Peace at the end of the year does not look like grand declarations or dramatic resolutions. It looks like small, honest choices. Choosing rest without apology or fewer promises instead of bigger ones. Choosing to protect your capacity so you can keep showing up, not perfectly, but honestly. This is especially important for those of us who hold a lot, emotionally, relationally, and spiritually. If you are someone others lean on, or you are someone who tends to carry more than your fair share, or even worse, you are someone who has learned to be strong because it once kept you safe, my darling, let this be the moment you loosen your grip just a little bit. Not because the world doesn't need care, because it does, trust me, but because the world does not benefit from you being emptied. You cannot pour from an empty cup. The coming year does not require a version of you who is sharper, faster, or more resilient at all costs. It requires a version of you who is still here, able to feel, listen, and to choose. To choose presence over performance. So, let the ending be quiet. Let it be imperfect and incomplete. Carry forward what keeps your hearth fire burning, not blazing, not burning out, just warm enough to last. Peace that endures is rarely loud, my witchlings. It moves slowly and it settles in and makes room. And you, exactly as you are, belong in it. So, my witchling, if you take nothing else from tonight, if everything else fades, blurs together, or feels like way too much to hold, take this. You are allowed to tend your fire instead of feeding it endlessly. You are allowed to notice when the flame is getting low and respond with care instead of panic. You are allowed to add fuel slowly and intentionally rather than throwing everything you have into the fire just to prove you're still committed. I'll get you committed, but you are allowed to rest without betraying your values. Rest does not mean you've stopped caring. It does not mean you've given up, and it really doesn't mean you've failed. Rest is how values stay embodied instead of becoming ideals you can no longer live up to. Rest is how compassion stays warm instead of sharp. And most of all, rest is how you remain reachable by yourself and by others. You are allowed to bless the world without losing yourself. You're not here to be consumed, to be emptied, or to disappear quietly in the name of being good, spiritual, or loving. Peace does not require your destruction, it requires your presence. Presence, imperfect, embodied, and human, is what allows peace to move through the world in a way that actually lasts. Not loudly, not dramatically, but steadily, relationally, through contact. Let the hearth remain lit, not blazing or burning out, just warm enough to gather around. If last year has taught us anything, if it has stripped away anything, let it be that the belief... Okay, I added a word. My brain is glitchy. If the last year has taught you anything, if it has stripped anything away, let it be the belief that you have to exhaust yourself to matter. Let it be the idea that care only counts when it hurts. You matter because you are here. Your capacity matters, your limits matter, and your continued presence matters. The world does not need you sharper, faster, or more depleted. It needs you still alive inside your own life, still able to feel, choose, and still able to stay. So as you step away from this conversation and back into whatever comes next, the dishes, the emails, cooking dinner, the night, and the quiet, carry this here with you gently. You do not have to solve everything. You do not have to carry everything. You do not have to prove a goddamn thing. you are allowed to pause, tend, and to return to yourself again and again. That's not withdrawal. That's wisdom. And it is more than enough. I am so glad you guys were here with me tonight. Until next time, spread love, spread joy, and spread kindness, because there's already enough darkness and hate out there. Please try to be a beacon of hope and light for those finding their way. Oh, I have an itch. Now, before we close, my darlings, I invite you to join me for our Friday night guided meditation and Yoga Nidra Asana, where we will rest deeply, release gently, and tend the inner hearth together. Until then, my loves, please remember that you are loved, you are wanted, you are needed, and your light does not have to burn itself out to prove that it exists. I love you guys to bits. Namaste, my witchlings.